Let's get into a spoiler-free movie review. I want to talk about Shazam, Fury of the Gods. What were my expectations going into the sequel? I would say right in the middle. I love DC characters. I think they have some of the best comic book characters, the most iconic comic book characters of all time, if you will. But when it comes to their movies, when it comes to their story execution, they are hit or miss. So now going into every DC movie, I just want to be entertained, and since I have that medium expectation, I can really be swayed either way. I could leave thinking, oh, that was actually a fun, really good time. I need to tell people about that, or the complete opposite of, they did it again. So which one will be the fate of Shazam, Fury of the Gods? We'll get into that. So before we get into my full thoughts on this movie, here is just a little bit of the Shazam, Fury of the Gods trailer.
A lot has changed in the last few years.
The wizard gave me superpowers. And then everybody got superpowers.
Started from the bottom, now we're here.
All right, here's the situation.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here.
The daughters of Atlas are coming to hunt us.
Children stole the power of the gods. You ripped it from our father's core.
Okay, I feel like maybe I should be writing all this down.
Give us the powers, child.
Your world will not survive this.
So what this movie is about, it picks up after the last Shazam. You have Billy Batson, and he's still trying to learn all about his powers. He struggles being a teenage kid and having this alter ego as Shazam. He is still living with all of his foster siblings, and they are now kind of in this position of the friendly neighborhood superheroes. They are this team going around and helping people in the city of Philadelphia. And then you have these three new villains that they are taking on, these ancient gods who are back trying to get the powers that they stole from them. So the powers that now live inside Billy Batson and all his siblings, whenever they say Shazam, they turn into superheroes. Those belong to these three women, and they are upset about it. So they get into a big battle trying to get their powers back, and then they want to destroy the world because that is what all superhero villains do, right? So let's go to the beginning of this movie. Again, we'll keep it spoiler free, but I thought this movie had a really good opening. One of the best DCEU openings that I've seen in the last 5 films, because they didn't waste a whole lot of time with a lot of backstory. Now, whenever you have a sequel to a superhero movie, I tend to enjoy that one a lot better because I think as superhero fans, we're a little bit tired of the origin story. We don't need to be told in every single movie how they got their powers. We've seen that again and again and again. We're kind of tired of that in part 1. So part 2 always begins where they already have their powers. We know how it works. It doesn't really matter. I don't even think you need to see Shazam 1 to fully enjoy Shazam 2. They do a pretty good job at resetting that entire movie within a couple flashbacks, almost like 1 to 2 minute scenes, and you basically know what happens, what is going on here. So if you are hesitant of going to see the sequel before seeing the first one, just go see the second one. So I thought it had a really good opening of getting right to the villains, trying to get these powers back, really setting the stage at what was to come, and really showing that they were going to be a threat. And that is what I felt in this entire movie. You always look for that struggle with the villain. Are your heroes going to be able to overpower them and stop their evil plan? And throughout this entire movie, I found myself saying a lot, how are they going to get out of this one? These villains seem pretty intense. There are 3 of them, so it's going to be hard for all these characters who are really just figuring out their powers. They're really just kids at heart to defeat these people who have been around for thousands of years. What I really loved that this movie was filled with was big FU and fun visuals. It's weird to say that this movie kind of went back to the root of superhero movies, but that's what I felt. It felt like a Marvel movie in that regard from 2008. Those early ones that are set in reality, set in a US city. For some reason, we've really gotten away from that. Everything now is being fought in space, in the multiverse, in the quantum realm. To get a superhero movie put back into a very iconic city, it really added this level that just felt familiar but fun and fresh at the same time. In particular, the scene where they are trying to save all these people from this collapsing bridge, it felt very much like a classic superhero moment that we haven't seen in a DC movie in a while, because they always focus on these ancient stories. They go back and do these really long backstories, going back through history. and it really takes away from what makes a superhero movie fun. That was my biggest takeaway from this movie. It is just a fun movie. Is it one of the most thought-provoking, push the envelope type superhero movies? No, and I think that's why some people are ripping this movie. It didn't really need to be that. When it comes down to it, I just want a movie that is entertaining. Superhero movies are a big passion of mine, and at the end of watching a superhero movie, is it an entertaining movie? That is all that matters to me in a superhero movie, and that is exactly what Shazam! Fury of the Gods was. I also realize now that this movie is very much geared towards a younger audience, and I think that is great. It really reminded me of the first time I saw the Power Rangers movie in theaters as a kid. There's some resemblance between the Power Rangers and all the characters in Shazam. They all have their own individual power. They're all related to a color. They all have these alter egos. So whenever they change into their superhero state, it's a lot different than who they are as kids. So there's the color and the power correlation between the two. And I thought that really worked for me. So if I were to see this movie back when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, this would be one of my favorites. Watching this movie made me realize there is something special, something so fun about a caped superhero. And that is what DC does best. Superman, Batman, Shazam, Black Adam all have a cape, and there's just something so dynamic about a caped superhero. The only problem I find with some of DC's characters right now, it's a little bit hard to distinguish them all. Shazam to me resembles 3 other characters on the big screen. Kind of looks like a red Superman, also basically the same thing as Black Adam, but with the red association, I can also see a little bit of the Flash in him. So sometimes distinguishing all the characters, I feel like for the general audience, you may get a little bit confused. And that is the thing that DC is probably facing right now, because over on the Marvel side, they are all very distinct characters. You know their origin stories to a T. When you get over into DC, sometimes it's a little bit harder to do, and I think that hurts them when trying to create this bigger world with all these different characters, and some of them are just a little bit too similar. Going back to this movie being geared towards a younger audience, that really came through in the overall message of this movie. It's Billy Batson and his struggle of, why do I even have these powers? Do I deserve them? I have no idea what I am even doing. I don't know what to do with this. And when he's facing these villains, he feels very much like a kid and has this imposter syndrome. I think that's a bold message to put out to kids, because they're going to feel that throughout their entire life. Even me as an adult watching this still struck a little bit of a chord with me. Sometimes you feel like you are not worthy of things. Sometimes you feel like you are in over your head. And if this movie did one thing, was showing a kid watching this that sometimes all you need to do is be given a shot. And that was a great message to put in this movie. So aside from the big fun visuals, kind of getting back to a classic superhero vibe, not really reinventing the genre, but making just a fun, fresh feeling movie, I thought what really came through was this movie had a lot of heart. And I think that's important for a superhero movie to have right now. Even myself as an adult, just hearing that sometimes people just need a shot to show you who they really are, to show you that they can really pull something off. Even I needed to hear that. A couple other things I enjoyed about this movie is that there were a lot of civilian casualties. And sometimes in superhero movies, a lot of the violence is a little bit implied, but people died in this movie. People as in just random individual civilians, and their deaths weren't really brutal in any way, but it was a little bit surprising. And I want to give a shout out to the extras in this movie. I don't think I've ever talked about extras in a review, but it really adds a difference when an extra gives a really great performance, and I saw that in this movie. There were several extras that just had some really great reactions to what was going on, because sometimes I think the reactions of extras in superhero movies is a little bit underplayed. You have a villain ripping through a city, buildings on fire, cars being thrown around, this mystical creature riding around on a dragon, and then you look at the extras in a normal movie and they're just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? In Shazam Fury of the Gods, there were legit reactions with screams and faces of terror. And that is something I wanted to recognize. It made me believe like, oh, they're really buying into this. So I hope these extras were paid a substantial amount of money because they really added some great texture to the background of a superhero movie that I have not seen done to date. So a round of applause to all the extras in this movie. If you're watching this or listening to this, you're probably not, but I see you. Obviously, some big standouts in the cast. I would have to give the performance of the entire movie to Helen Mirren, who I did not really see it in her to be a villain in a superhero movie, but she was probably my favorite part. Of course, Zachary Levi is just a really likable actor, and I love how he is able to capture the emotions of a teenager and put that into the character of Shazam. It's a bit of a bummer to me that this movie didn't do as well at the box office its opening weekend. Probably a couple contributing factors. Number one being March has been incredibly stacked for movies, one of my favorite movie months in probably the last 2 years since movies really bounced back after the pandemic. You had Creed 3, you had Scream 6, John Wick 4. Cocaine Bear had its moment in February that I felt was carried over by word of mouth into March. You have March Madness going on in the sports world. So I feel like as Americans, we have so many things to watch that Shazam got sandwiched in there, and it opened to $30.5 million. And that is down from the original, which opened to $53.5 million back in 2019. So a $30.5 million opening for a movie that cost $110 million to make isn't great. It doesn't deserve the criticism it's received online. The director, who also directed the first one, even made a statement on Twitter, which I found a little bit heartbreaking. David F. Sandberg, who directed the movie, said he is done with superhero movies for a while because he couldn't take the criticism. He was like, we actually made a good movie. I don't know why it's not doing so well. And it's hard to come on the defense for something like this when the numbers aren't there, but for something you are so passionate about and work so hard to make a movie to be proud of, and you actually make something in those parameters that's a really good movie, and now because of a low Rotten Tomato score, people aren't going to watch it. It just almost feels like DC movies are set up to fail, and that no matter what, people are going to say bad things about them. Maybe even my own personal theory that other studios pay to review bomb them. There, I said it. I feel like they just come at such a disadvantage, and for this one, they don't really deserve it. But David F. Sandberg said he is going back, not doing superhero movies. He will now focus on horror movies, so I'll be down to watch those. I hope that the reputation of this movie doesn't carry over to that and people don't want to hire him, because I think he's a great director. I think where you have to look at for this movie is what audiences are saying about it. People who actually went to see the movie, because it has a high audience score, and it has a high score with me. For Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods, I give it 4 out of 5 lightning bolts. A movie that is filled with laughs, fun, fun visuals, great superhero action, and a movie that has a lot of heart.